The old man grabbed Maria's wrist so hard that she almost dropped her bag of groceries right there on the sidewalk. "Please," he said, his voice shaking, his eyes wide with fear. "Please, I don't know where I am." Maria looked around. Cars rushed past on the busy road. People walked by without even turning their heads, as if an old man standing alone and terrified was something they saw every single day and had simply stopped noticing. Nobody stopped. Nobody asked if he was okay. They just kept walking, phones in their hands, earphones in their ears, eyes fixed straight ahead. But Maria stopped. She knelt down slightly so she could look at him properly. He was tall, though his back was bent with age. His coat was expensive, dark gray wool, buttoned unevenly, as if he had dressed in a hurry or without a clear mind. His shoes were polished leather, but one lace was untied. His hands trembled as he held onto a small photograph, its edges worn soft from years of touching. "Sir, it's okay," Maria said gently. "Take a breath. I'm right here. What's your name?" He blinked at her, confused, his mouth opening and closing like he was searching for the answer somewhere deep inside himself, and couldn't find it. I don't remember," he whispered. "I was walking. I was just walking. And then everything looked different. The street looked different. I don't know this street." Maria's chest tightened. She had seen this kind of confusion before, when her own grandmother had gotten lost 2 streets from home, back before she passed. It was a specific kind of fear, the fear of a mind that usually worked well suddenly failing you in public, in front of strangers, with nowhere safe to hide. "That's all right," Maria said, keeping her voice calm and warm, the same voice she used with tired customers at the diner when they were about to lose their patience over a wrong order. "We're going to figure this out together. Can I see that picture you're holding?" The old man loosened his grip slightly and held the photograph toward her. It showed a young boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old, standing next to a woman with kind eyes and dark hair, both of them smiling at the camera on what looked like a beach somewhere warm. "That's my son," the old man said, his voice softening as he looked at it. "He's a good boy. He takes care of me now that his mother is gone." "He sounds wonderful," Maria said. "Do you know his name? Or maybe a phone number we could call?" The old man's face crumpled again, panic returning like a wave. "I can't remember. I can't remember it." "Why can't I remember?" Hey, it's fine," Maria said quickly, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "It happens. Your mind is just tired right now. Let's not force it. How about you come with me somewhere safe, somewhere warm, and we can sit down and think clearly. I work just around that corner." She pointed toward a small diner with a faded red sign that read Rosie's Kitchen, its windows glowing with warm yellow light against the gray evening outside. It wasn't fancy. The paint on the door was chipped, and one of the outdoor chairs had a wobbly leg that nobody had ever bothered to fix. But it was familiar to Maria, and familiar places felt safer than strange streets, especially for a man who had lost his sense of direction, and, it seemed, a good portion of his memory along with it. The old man hesitated, glancing around at the unfamiliar buildings, the honking cars, the hurried strangers. Then he looked back at Maria, at her steady eyes, and the way she hadn't once looked at him like he was a burden or a problem to be avoided. "All right," he said quietly. "All right, I'll come with you." Maria offered her arm, and he took it, leaning on her slightly as they walked. He was heavier than he looked, and Maria was not a small woman herself, curvy and strong from years of carrying trays and standing on her feet for 10 hours a day, but she held steady, matching his slow pace, careful not to rush him even though the evening air had turned cold, and she could feel goosebumps rising on her arms. "What's your name, dear?" the old man asked as they walked. "Maria." "Maria," he repeated, like he was testing the sound of it. "That's a lovely name. My wife's name was Marianne. She used to say her name was almost like yours, just longer." "She sounds like she had good taste," Maria said with a small smile, trying to keep the conversation light, trying to keep him talking so his mind wouldn't spiral back into panic. It worked. By the time they reached the diner, the old man was telling her about a garden he used to keep, roses that never seemed to survive the winter, no matter what he tried, and a dog he'd had decades ago that used to dig holes under the fence just to escape and visit the neighbor's cat. Maria pushed open the door of Rosie's kitchen, and the warmth of the diner wrapped around them both. The evening crowd was thin, just a couple of regulars finishing their coffee near the window, and the low hum of a radio playing an old song behind the counter. "Maria, who's this?" asked Nora, the other waitress working the evening shift, her eyebrows raised as she looked at the old man being carefully guided to a booth near the back. "I found him outside, lost," Maria said quietly, not wanting to alarm him further by discussing him like he wasn't standing right there. "He can't remember where he lives. I'm going to sit with him for a bit, see if we can figure it out." Nora's expression softened immediately. "Of course. I'll bring some tea. And soup, maybe? He looks cold." "That would be perfect. Thank you." Maria helped the old man settle into the booth, the red vinyl seat creaking slightly under his weight. He looked around the diner with the same searching expression he'd had on the street, like he was trying to place it somewhere in his memory, trying to find a thread that would lead him back to himself. "This is a nice place," he said finally, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "It reminds me of somewhere. I can't think where." "That's a good sign," Maria said, sliding into the seat across from him. "Little pieces are coming back. We just have to be patient." Nora brought over a steaming bowl of vegetable soup and a cup of tea, setting them down carefully in front of the old man. He wrapped his trembling hands around the warm cup first, closing his eyes for a moment as the heat seeped into his fingers. "Thank you," he said softly, to both of them. "You didn't have to do any of this. Most people would have just walked past." "Most people are in a hurry," Maria said. "Doesn't mean it's right." The old man studied her for a long moment, his eyes suddenly sharper, more present than they had been on the street. "You have a kind heart. That's rare these days. People forget how to be kind when they're busy trying to be important." Maria laughed softly. "I'm not trying to be important. I'm just trying to help a person who needs it. That's all this is." As he sipped his soup, his fingers stopped shaking so much, and the color slowly returned to his pale cheeks. Maria watched him carefully, patient and quiet, letting him eat in peace before she gently tried again. "Do you remember anything else? A street name? A building? Anything at all?" He frowned, thinking hard, his spoon pausing halfway to his mouth. "There was a tall gate, black, with gold at the top, and a long driveway with trees on both sides. I remember walking out of it, because I wanted some fresh air, and then I don't know what happened after that. The streets just started looking wrong." "That's something," Maria said encouragingly. "A big house with a gate like that shouldn't be too hard to find, especially around here. Do you know anyone we could call? Neighbors, maybe? Or someone who works for the house?" The old man's face lit up suddenly, and he pulled a folded piece of paper from his coat pocket, the edges soft with handling, much like the photograph had been. "Here, my son wrote this number down for me once, in case I ever needed it. I keep it with me always, though I don't remember why I never thought to check it before." Maria took the paper and unfolded it carefully. A phone number was written in neat, firm handwriting, along with a single word beneath it: emergency. "This is perfect," Maria said, relief washing through her. "I'll call this right now, okay? Just relax and finish your soup." She stood up and walked toward the counter, phone in hand, glancing back once to make sure the old man was comfortable, that he wasn't staring around in fresh panic. He wasn't. He was looking down at the photograph again, tracing the edge of it gently with his thumb, a small, sad smile on his face. Maria dialed the number, her heart beating a little faster than usual. She didn't know who would answer. A relative maybe, or a housekeeper, someone worried and searching. The line rang once, twice, and then a deep voice answered, low and controlled, carrying an edge of tension that Maria could feel even through the phone. "Who is this?" "Hi, my name is Maria. I found an elderly man outside near 5th and Grant, and he seems lost and confused. He had this number in his pocket, and he told me it was for emergencies. Is this his family?" There was a pause on the line, a heavy, sharp silence that made Maria's stomach tighten without knowing why. "Where exactly are you?" the voice asked, sharper now, more urgent, every word clipped and controlled like a man used to giving orders and having them followed instantly. "Rosie's kitchen, on Grant Street. He's safe, he's warm, we gave him some soup. He's a little confused, but he's talking, and he seems calmer now. "Don't let him out of your sight," the voice said. "I'm coming. Do not let anyone else near him. Do you understand me?" The strange intensity in his tone sent a small chill down Maria's spine, but she pushed it aside. This was a frightened family member, she told herself. Worried about someone he loved, that was all. That was normal. "I understand," she said. "We'll be right here." The call ended abruptly. No goodbye, just silence. Maria stood there for a second, staring at her phone, an odd feeling settling over her that she couldn't quite name. Something about the way he'd spoken, something about the urgency, the control, the unspoken weight behind every word. She glanced toward the window, half expecting headlights already, though she knew that was foolish. Whoever was coming would need time, even if he drove fast, even if the whole city seemed to bend out of his way when he moved through it, which was a thought that made no sense to her and yet lingered anyway. Nora walked over, wiping her hands on her apron, her eyes flicking toward the old man in the booth. "Everything all right? You look like you saw a ghost." "I don't know," Maria admitted quietly, keeping her voice low so it wouldn't carry. The man on the phone sounded serious, like really serious. "Told me not to let anyone near him." Nora shrugged, unbothered. Rich families get like that sometimes, probably worried about kidnapping or something. People with money always think everyone's after them. "Maybe," Maria said, though the word on the phone, emergency, and the tone of that voice, still sat uneasily in her chest. She pushed it aside again and forced herself to focus on what mattered, the frightened old man sitting quietly a few feet away, waiting for his family to come find him. She shook it off and walked back to the booth, forcing a reassuring smile onto her face. "Good news, I reached someone. They're on their way now." The old man looked up at her, relief flooding his features, his eyes suddenly wet. "Thank you," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "Thank you, Maria. I don't know what I would have done without you." "You don't have to thank me," she said, sitting back down across from him. "Anyone would have done the same." The old man shook his head slowly, setting down his spoon. "No. I have lived a long life, Maria, and I have learned that most people walk past trouble because they are afraid it might follow them home. You did not walk past. That says something about your character." "I just couldn't leave you standing there," Maria said simply. "You looked scared. Nobody deserves to feel that scared alone on a street corner." "What do you do here, at this diner?" he asked, clearly wanting to keep talking, keep his mind busy, and away from the fear that still lingered underneath his calmer expression. "I've worked here for almost 4 years, Maria said. "Started as a part-time job while I was figuring out what I wanted to do. Never quite left. Nora and I practically run the evening shift together. It's not glamorous, but the people are good, and Rosie, the owner, she treats us like family." "That matters more than people realize," the old man said. "Being treated like family. I built a whole life once trying to keep the people around me safe, trying to hold everyone together, and somewhere along the way, I forgot to ask if I was doing it the right way. My son. He carries a heavy weight now, heavier than any young man should have to carry." Maria tilted her head, curious despite herself. "What does he do?" The old man's eyes grew distant, guarded in a way they hadn't been before. "He runs the family business. It is complicated. Demanding. He does not sleep much, and he trusts very few people. I worry about him more than I let on." Something in his tone told Maria not to push further, so she didn't. Instead, she reached over and gently refilled his tea from the small pot Nora had left on the table. "Well, whatever he does, he sounds like he loves you very much. That phone call, the way that man spoke, he was scared for you. You could hear it in his voice." The old man smiled, a real smile this time, warm and full of quiet pride. He has always been like that, fierce, protective, even as a boy. Lost his mother too young and decided the world owed him nothing, so he took what he needed and made sure nobody could ever hurt what was his again. I sometimes wonder if I raised him wrong, teaching him to trust so little. Maybe he just learned to survive, Maria offered gently. That doesn't mean he can't still learn to trust too, if he meets the right people. The old man looked at her for a long moment, something thoughtful passing behind his eyes, as though her words meant more to him than she realized. "Perhaps," he said quietly. Perhaps you are right. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. She had seen the street, seen the people walking past him, seen how easy it was for a frightened old man to become invisible in a world that moved too fast to notice anyone who couldn't keep up. Not anyone would have stopped. But she had, and she didn't regret it, not even a little, no matter what was coming through that door next. Outside, the evening had grown fully dark, streetlights flickering on one by one along Grant Street, and somewhere out there, a car was already speeding through the city, heading straight for Rosie's kitchen, carrying a man whose name most people in this city were far too afraid to speak out loud. Maria had no idea who she was about to meet. She only knew that the frightened old man across from her, quietly finishing his soup and holding tightly to an old photograph, needed someone to make sure he made it home safely. And that was more than enough reason for her to stay exactly where she was, waiting, watching the door, ready to protect a stranger she had known for less than an hour, but already cared about deeply. Nora walked by again, topping up water glasses for the other customers, and gave Maria a small, curious smile. You always did have a soft heart, you know that? Ever since I met you, picking up strays, giving away free coffee to anyone who looked like they were having a bad day. Somebody has to, Maria said, smiling back, though her eyes kept drifting toward the front window every few seconds. The old man reached across the table suddenly and placed his hand over hers, his fingers no longer trembling the way they had been on the street. Whatever happens next, he said, his voice steady now, almost solemn, I want you to know that tonight, you were kind to a stranger who had nothing to offer you in return. Remember that you did that, no matter what comes through that door. Maria frowned slightly at the strange weight in his words, but before she could ask what he meant, headlights swept across the window, bright and sudden, followed by the low growl of a powerful engine pulling to a stop right outside. The bell above the diner door would ring soon, and when it did, everything about Maria's ordinary quiet life was going to change. The diner door swung open so hard it slammed against the wall, and every head inside turned at once. A man stepped through the doorway, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark coat that moved like it had been made specifically for him. His eyes swept the room in a single sharp motion, taking in every table, every face, every possible threat, before landing on the old man sitting in the back booth. The tension in his jaw eased for just a fraction of a second, relief flashing through his expression before it disappeared behind a wall of cold control. Dad! The old man's face lit up instantly. Dante, there you are. Dante crossed the diner in a few long strides, ignoring the stares from the other customers, ignoring Nora frozen behind the counter with a coffee pot still in her hand. He knelt beside the booth, his hands moving over his father's shoulders, his arms, checking him the way someone checks for injuries after an accident. Are you hurt? Did anyone touch you? What happened? I'm fine, the old man said, patting his son's hand. I just went for a walk and got a little turned around. This young woman found me and took care of me. For the first time, Dante's eyes moved to Maria, who was standing awkwardly a few feet away, unsure whether to sit back down or give them privacy. His gaze was sharp, assessing, the kind of look that made Maria feel like she was being measured against some invisible standard she didn't know existed. You're the one who called, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Maria said, straightening her shoulders slightly under the weight of his stare. I found him near 5th and Grant. He seemed confused, so I brought him inside where it was warm and tried to figure out who to call. Dante studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Maria had waited on hundreds of customers over the years, difficult ones, rude ones who looked down at her because of the apron she wore or the job she did. She was used to being looked at and dismissed quickly. But this was different. This felt like he was trying to find the trick, the angle, the reason she had really done what she did. Why? He asked finally. Maria blinked. Why what? Why did you help him? Most people would have walked past, or called the police and left it at that. Why did you take him inside, feed him, sit with him for however long that took? Because he was scared and alone, Maria said simply, a small frown forming on her face at the strangeness of the question. Isn't that reason enough? Something flickered behind Dante's eyes, something that looked almost like surprise, though it vanished as quickly as it appeared. He straightened up, reaching into his coat and pulling out a thick envelope, setting it on the table in front of Maria without a word. Maria looked down at it, then back up at him. "What's this?" "For your trouble," Dante said, "and for your silence. Whatever you saw here tonight, whatever you think you understand about who I am, it stays in this diner. Are we clear?" Maria felt something in her chest tighten, not fear exactly, but a sharp flash of offense that straightened her spine and steadied her voice. "I don't want your money." Dante's eyebrows rose slightly, the first genuine reaction he had shown since walking through the door. "Excuse me?" "I said I don't want it," Maria repeated, pushing the envelope back across the table toward him. "I didn't help your father because I wanted to be paid. I helped him because it was the right thing to do. You can keep your envelope." The diner had gone completely silent. Nora stood frozen behind the counter, and the two customers by the window had stopped pretending not to listen. Dante stared at Maria like she had spoken a language he didn't recognize, his jaw tight, his eyes narrowed slightly, trying to understand what he was looking at. "Everyone wants something," Dante said slowly, like he was testing the words, waiting for her to prove him right. "Not everyone," Maria said. "I know that might be hard to believe, given whatever world you live in, but not everyone." The old man, who had been watching the exchange with quiet amusement, let out a soft chuckle. "I told you, Dante. She has a kind heart. Not everyone is trying to trick you or use you. Some people are simply good." Dante looked between his father and Maria, something shifting behind his controlled expression, though he quickly folded the envelope back into his coat without another word about it. "Fine," he said. "No money. But I still owe you something. That's not up for discussion." "You don't owe me anything," Maria said, though she could tell from the set of his jaw that arguing further would be pointless. Some men simply could not accept a debt going unpaid, and something told her Dante was exactly that kind of man. "My father was wandering the streets of this city, confused and alone, and you were the only person who stopped," Dante said, his voice lower now, more controlled but somehow more intense because of it. "Do you understand what could have happened to him? Do you understand who might have found him instead of you?" Maria didn't fully understand what he meant. Not yet, but the weight behind his words made her uneasy all the same. "I understand he needed help, and I gave it. That's all there is to it." Dante studied her for another long moment, and then, to Maria's surprise, some of the hardness in his posture eased. He pulled out a chair from the neighboring table and sat down across from her, next to his father, as if he had decided something important in that brief silence. "Tell me what happened," he said. "From the beginning. Everything." Maria hesitated, glancing at the old man, who gave her an encouraging nod. So she told him, describing the moment she saw the old man standing on the sidewalk, confused and afraid, how everyone else had simply walked past without a second glance, how she had brought him inside and given him something warm to eat, while trying to help him remember anything that might lead them to his family. As she spoke, Dante's expression grew darker, though not toward Maria. His anger seemed directed somewhere else entirely, at the people who had walked past his father, at whatever circumstances had allowed an old man in his condition to wander so far from home unsupervised. "He wasn't supposed to be alone," Dante muttered, almost to himself. "I told them, he is never to be left alone, not even for a moment." "It wasn't anyone's fault," the old man said gently, placing a hand on his son's arm. "I told the nurse I wanted to sit in the garden by myself for a few minutes. She stepped away to answer the phone, and I simply kept walking. It happens sometimes, Dante. My mind is not what it used to be." Dante's expression softened slightly at his father's words, though the tension in his shoulders didn't fully disappear. He turned back to Maria, and this time, something had changed in the way he looked at her. Less suspicion, more genuine curiosity. "You work here?" he asked. 4 years, Maria said. "Evening shifts, mostly. It pays the bills, and I like the people." "And you always do this? Help strangers off the street? Invite them into your workplace? Spend your evening trying to solve their problems for nothing in return?" Maria shrugged, feeling a little self-conscious under the weight of his attention. "I don't know if I always do it. I just did what felt right tonight. He needed help. I was there. It wasn't complicated." "Nothing about tonight was simple," Dante said quietly. glancing at his father, who was now sipping the last of his tea with a peaceful, contented expression, as if the earlier fear had never touched him at all. You have no idea how complicated it actually was. Maria wanted to ask what he meant, wanted to understand the strange intensity radiating off him, the protectiveness that seemed to run far deeper than a typical worried son checking on an elderly parent. But something told her this wasn't the moment to push, and she let the question sit unspoken between them. "Can I ask you something?" Maria said, before she could stop herself. Dante's eyes met hers, wary but curious. "Go ahead." "That call earlier, you sounded like you expected something terrible. Not just a lost old man wandering off, something worse. What did you think happened to him?" For a moment, Dante didn't answer. His jaw tightened, and his gaze drifted briefly to his father, who was humming quietly to himself as he finished the last of his tea, oblivious to the weight of the conversation happening a few feet away. "There are people in this city who would very much like to hurt me," Dante said finally, his voice low and even, like he had said the words so many times before, that they no longer carried any shock for him, only fact. "And they know that hurting the people I love is far more effective than coming after me directly. My father is not just my father. To some people, he is a way to reach me." Maria felt a chill settle over her, understanding now why Dante had checked his father so carefully for injuries, why his voice on the phone had carried that sharp, controlled edge of barely restrained panic. "That's a terrible way to live," she said quietly, "always looking over your shoulder like that." "It's the only way I know how to live," Dante said, and for just a moment, something tired and almost human flickered behind his controlled expression, gone before Maria could fully name it. "You get used to it. Or you don't survive long enough to complain about it." "That's a sad way to put it." "It's an honest way to put it," Dante corrected. "Honesty is rare in my line of work, Maria. I find I appreciate it wherever I find it, even from a diner waitress who refuses my money and argues with me in front of my own father." Despite the tension of the evening, Maria felt the corner of her mouth twitch upward. "Is that a compliment?" "Take it however you like," Dante said, though something in his tone suggested it was, in fact, meant as one. The old man chuckled softly from his seat, watching the two of them with obvious amusement. "You two argue like you have known each other for years already. It is rather entertaining to watch." "Dad?" Dante said, a warning note in his voice, though there was no real heat behind it. "I am simply making an observation," the old man said innocently, holding up his hands in mock surrender, and for the first time since walking through the door, Dante's stern expression cracked into something close to a real smile, brief and unguarded, there and gone in an instant. Maria found herself staring at that smile a beat longer than she meant to, surprised by how much it changed his face, how the cold, controlled mask slipped for just a moment to reveal someone younger, someone less burdened, someone who might have been an entirely different person if his life had gone a different way. "Well," she said instead, standing up and smoothing down her apron, "I'm glad he's safe now, and I'm glad you found him quickly. That's really all that matters." Dante rose as well, standing to his full height, which made Maria very aware of how much taller he was than her, how the air around him seemed to shift slightly whenever he moved, like the whole room adjusted itself to his presence without anyone deciding to do so. "I'm taking my father home," Dante said. "But this isn't finished. I don't leave debts unpaid, Maria." It was the first time he had used her name, and something about the way he said it, careful, deliberate, like he was testing how it felt in his mouth, sent an unexpected shiver through her that she quickly pushed aside. "There's no debt," she insisted again, though she suspected, from the look in his eyes, that this argument was far from over. The old man stood slowly, leaning on his son's arm, and turned back to Maria with a warm, grateful smile. "Thank you again, dear. Truly. I hope our paths cross again soon."
"I hope so too," Maria said, meaning it, surprised by how much she already liked this gentle, kind old man she had known for barely 2 hours.
Dante guided his father toward the door, his hand steady and protective against the old man's back, though he paused just before stepping outside and looked back at Maria one final time. "I'll be in touch," he said, and then he was gone, the bell above the door ringing once, as the two of them disappeared into the dark car waiting outside. Nora rushed over the second the door closed, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Do you have any idea who that was?" "His name is Dante," Maria said, still staring at the door, a strange, unsettled feeling lingering in her chest. "That's all I know." "That's Dante Moretti," Nora whispered, glancing nervously toward the window as if he might somehow still hear her. "Everyone in this city knows that name. His family runs half the businesses on the east side, and not the kind of businesses you put on a resume, if you understand what I'm saying." Maria felt a cold weight settle in her stomach as the pieces slowly clicked together, the intensity in his voice on the phone, the way he had checked his father for injuries like violence, was a real and constant threat. The careful, controlled way he moved through the world, like danger followed him everywhere he went. "I just helped a lost old man," Maria said quietly, almost to herself. "I didn't know." "Well, you know now," Nora said, still staring at the door. "And knowing him, that's not the end of it. Men like that don't just walk away and forget a favor." Maria looked down at her hands, still able to feel the phantom weight of the old man's trembling fingers gripping her wrist on that sidewalk, still able to hear his frightened voice asking for help. Whatever consequences came from tonight, whatever world she had accidentally stepped into, she couldn't bring herself to regret stopping for him. "You should be careful," Nora added, lowering her voice even though the diner was now empty except for the two of them. "I'm not saying he's a bad man exactly. I've heard people say he's fair, that he protects his own, and doesn't go looking for trouble he doesn't need. But fair or not, that's still a dangerous world to get pulled into, Maria. People who cross his family don't exactly get a polite conversation about it." "I'm not getting pulled into anything," Maria said, though her voice lacked its usual certainty. "I helped his father, that's it. I'm not going to see him again." Nora raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. "A man like that doesn't say I'll be in touch unless he means it. Mark my words. You haven't seen the last of Dante Moretti." Maria busied herself wiping down the counter, partly to have something to do with her hands, partly to avoid the knowing look on Nora's face. "Even if he does come back, it doesn't have to mean anything. Maybe he just wants to make sure his father is all right. Maybe he wants to say thank you properly, without the envelope full of money this time." "Maybe," Nora said, though her tone made it clear she didn't believe that for a second. "Or maybe a man like that doesn't know how to let a debt go unpaid, and maybe a woman like you, kind-hearted and stubborn as anything, is about to find herself somewhere she never expected to be." Maria didn't have an answer for that, mostly because some small, quiet part of her feared Nora might be right. She thought about the way Dante's expression had softened when his father teased him, the tired honesty in his voice when he spoke about the dangers that shadowed his family, the surprising warmth underneath all that careful control. She finished wiping down the last table in silence, turned off the lights one by one, and locked the door behind her as she stepped out into the cool night air. The street where she had found the old man earlier that evening was empty now, quiet, no trace remaining of the fear and confusion that had brought two strangers crashing into each other's lives. Maria walked home slowly, her mind replaying the events of the evening over and over, the trembling old man on the sidewalk, the protective fury in his son's eyes, the strange, unexpected warmth that had passed between all three of them by the time the night ended. She told herself it was nothing, that Dante's promise to stay in touch was simply politeness, simply a man honoring his sense of obligation, before disappearing back into his own complicated world. But as she climbed the stairs to her small apartment and finally let herself inside, locking the door behind her out of habit rather than any real fear, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted that night, something quiet but permanent, and that Dante Moretti's parting words, "I'll be in touch," were not simply a polite goodbye, but a promise that her quiet, ordinary life was about to become far more complicated than she had ever imagined. The black car was parked outside Rosie's kitchen again, exactly 1 week after that first frightening night, and Maria's stomach dropped the moment she spotted it through the window while wiping down the counter. She told herself it wasn't him. It could be anyone with a nice car. But then the driver's door opened, and the old man stepped out, moving slower than Dante had that first night, but with a bright, cheerful expression that immediately put Maria at ease. "Maria," he called out as he walked through the door, waving like they were old friends reuniting after years apart. "I hoped you would be working tonight." "Mr. Moretti," Maria said, coming around the counter to greet him, unable to stop the genuine smile spreading across her face. "It's so good to see you. You look wonderful. How are you feeling?" "Much better, thank you," he said, settling into the same booth from the week before, as if it had already become his usual spot. "The doctors adjusted my medication, and I have a very attentive nurse now who does not leave my side, much to my frustration, though I understand why my son insists on it." Maria laughed softly, sliding into the seat across from him without needing to be asked. "I'm sure he just worries about you." "He worries about everything," the old man said, though the fondness in his voice made it clear this was not a complaint. "Speaking of which, he does not know I am here tonight. I told the driver I wanted to visit an old friend for tea." Maria's eyebrows rose. "You snuck out?" "I convinced my driver, Enzo, that a short, supervised visit to a diner would do me far more good than another quiet evening at home," the old man said, with a mischievous glint in his eyes that made Maria laugh out loud. "Enzo is waiting right outside, watching every window like a hawk, so do not worry. I have not truly escaped anyone's care. I simply wanted to see you again, properly, without all that tension from before." Nora appeared beside the table with her notepad, giving Maria a knowing look before addressing the old man politely. "What can I get for you tonight, sir?" "Tea, please, and whatever pastry looks freshest. And please, call me Salvatore. Mr. Moretti makes me feel far older than I already am." Nora smiled and disappeared toward the kitchen, leaving Maria alone with Salvatore, who was studying her with warm, curious eyes. "Tell me about yourself, Maria," Salvatore said, properly this time, "not just how you found me on that street corner. I want to know who you are." Maria hesitated, unused to anyone showing this much genuine interest in her ordinary life. "There's not much to tell. I grew up not far from here. My parents ran a small grocery store before they retired and moved south. I have a younger brother studying engineering at the state college. I've worked here at the diner for 4 years, and someday, maybe, I'd like to open a small bakery of my own, though that's more of a dream than a real plan right now." "Why is it only a dream?" Salvatore asked, leaning forward slightly. "You speak of it like something impossible." "Money, mostly," Maria admitted with a small shrug. "Renting a space, buying equipment, all of that costs more than I've managed to save so far. Someday, maybe. For now, this job pays the bills, and I like the people well enough." Salvatore nodded thoughtfully, though he didn't push the subject further, seeming to sense that Maria wasn't looking for pity or charity, simply stating a fact about her life the way anyone might. Nora returned with his tea and a slice of lemon cake, and their conversation drifted easily to other things: his garden, her brother's latest engineering project, an old movie they had both happened to watch and love. It was easy, comfortable, the kind of conversation Maria rarely had with customers who usually came and went without much more than a polite greeting and a request for their check. She found herself genuinely enjoying his company, his gentle humor, the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed at something she said. The bell above the door rang, and this time, Maria didn't need to look up to know who had walked in. The air in the diner seemed to shift, the same way it had the week before, heavy and charged in a way she couldn't quite explain. "Dad," Dante's voice carried across the room, tight, with barely controlled frustration. "Enzo told me where you were, but I did not quite believe him." "Sit down, Dante," Salvatore said calmly, gesturing to the empty seat beside Maria, without a hint of guilt for the trouble he had clearly caused. "I am perfectly safe. I have Maria here keeping me excellent company, and Enzo watching the door like a nervous mother hen." Dante's eyes moved to Maria, and for a moment, the tension in his shoulders seemed to ease slightly, though his expression remained guarded. "You didn't tell me he was coming here." "I didn't know," Maria said honestly. "He just showed up a little while ago. I promise I wasn't trying to keep secrets from you." Dante studied her for a moment, as if searching for any sign of dishonesty, and apparently found none, because the hard line of his shoulders relaxed slightly further. He sat down beside his father, still glancing occasionally toward the window, toward the street outside, a habit Maria was beginning to realize he probably never fully turned off. "You cannot keep doing this," Dante said to his father, though his voice had lost most of its earlier sharpness. sneaking off without telling me. Do you understand how it feels, getting a call that you've disappeared again? I did not disappear, Salvatore said patiently. I told Enzo exactly where we were going, and he stayed right outside the entire time. I simply did not tell you because I knew you would insist on coming along and hovering, and I wanted one quiet evening without you pacing behind me like a worried guard dog. Despite himself, Dante's mouth twitched at the corner, something close to a reluctant smile breaking through his stern expression. I don't pace. You absolutely pace, Salvatore said, turning to Maria for support. Doesn't he seem like the type who paces? Maria bit back a laugh, glancing at Dante's raised eyebrow, silently daring her to agree with his father. I've only known him a week, but I have to admit, he does seem like a pacer. Salvatore let out a delighted laugh, clapping his hands together once. You see, even a stranger can tell. I don't think a week qualifies as a stranger, Dante said quietly, his eyes lingering on Maria a beat longer than necessary, something unreadable passing behind them. The comment hung in the air, and Maria felt an unexpected warmth rise in her cheeks, quickly looking down at her hands to avoid whatever expression might be showing on her face. Nora, ever perceptive, chose that exact moment to reappear with a fresh pot of coffee, breaking the strange tension that had settled over the table. Coffee for you, sir? She asked Dante, who nodded briefly, still watching Maria with that same quiet intensity. Over the next hour, Dante slowly relaxed, though he never fully let his guard down, his eyes still tracking the door every time the bell rang, still watching the street outside whenever headlights passed. But he talked more than Maria expected, asking about her brother's studies, listening genuinely when she mentioned her dream of a small bakery, even offering a few surprisingly thoughtful suggestions about locations that might work well for a business like that. You know a lot about opening businesses, Maria observed at one point, curious despite herself. I know a lot about a great many things, Dante said simply, not offering further explanation, though the corner of his mouth twitched again, like he found her curiosity more amusing than intrusive. By the time Salvatore finished his second cup of tea, the diner had mostly emptied out for the night, and Maria noticed him growing quieter, more tired, his earlier energy fading as the evening wore on. I think it's time I got you home, Dante said gently, noticing the same thing, standing and helping his father rise from the booth with practiced care. Thank you for the lovely evening, Maria, Salvatore said, patting her hand warmly. I hope you will not make me wait another week before I see you again. You're welcome here anytime, Maria said sincerely, meaning every word. Just maybe let your son know next time, so he doesn't worry so much. Salvatore chuckled, allowing Dante to guide him toward the door. But Dante paused before following, turning back to Maria with an expression she couldn't quite read. Thank you, he said quietly, for humoring him, for being kind to him without making him feel like a burden. That means more than you probably realize. He's not a burden, Maria said firmly. He's wonderful company, I mean that. Something shifted in Dante's expression, warm and genuine, in a way she hadn't seen from him before. I'll see you soon, Maria. It wasn't a question this time, and somehow, Maria found she didn't mind that at all. Over the following 2 weeks, Salvatore's visits became a regular occurrence, sometimes with Dante trailing cautiously behind, sometimes arriving alone with Enzo waiting patiently outside. Maria found herself looking forward to those evenings more than she wanted to admit, the easy warmth of Salvatore's company, and increasingly, the quiet, watchful presence of his son, who seemed to find more and more reasons to linger at the diner longer than necessary. One evening, Salvatore stayed home with a mild cold, and Dante arrived alone, sliding into the same booth without his father beside him for the first time. Maria noticed the empty seat across from him, and felt an unexpected flicker of nerves as she approached the table. Is he all right? She asked immediately, concern coloring her voice. Just a cold, Dante said, waving a hand to reassure her. The nurse insisted he rest tonight, and for once, he actually listened. He was disappointed to miss seeing you, though he made me promise to bring back a slice of that lemon cake he likes so much. Maria smiled, relieved, and gestured for Nora to prepare a slice to go before sitting down across from him, something that had become natural between them over the past 2 weeks. So it's just you tonight. Just me, Dante confirmed, watching her with that same quiet intensity that still sent a small thrill through her chest every time, though she was slowly growing more comfortable under the weight of his attention. Is that a problem? Not at all, Maria said honestly. Though I imagine the conversation will be a little less entertaining without your father's teasing. I can be entertaining, Dante said, a rare hint of humor coloring his usually serious tone. Prove it, Maria challenged, surprising herself with how easily the words came out. Dante studied her for a long moment, something warm and unguarded passing behind his eyes, and then, slowly, he began telling her a story about a disastrous vacation his family had taken to the coast when he was a teenager, how his father had insisted on renting a small sailboat, despite knowing nothing about sailing, how they had ended up stranded offshore for nearly 3 hours while his mother laughed so hard she nearly fell into the water herself. Maria laughed harder than she had in months, genuinely delighted by the image of a young, awkward Dante clinging to the side of a drifting sailboat while his parents argued cheerfully about whose fault it was. It was strange, seeing glimpses of an ordinary childhood behind the controlled, guarded man sitting across from her, strange and oddly comforting, like finding proof that somewhere underneath all that careful armor, there was still a person who had once been simply a boy on a boat with his parents, laughing at nothing in particular. You don't talk about her much, Maria said gently, once their laughter had faded. Your mother. Dante's expression shifted, something heavier settling behind his eyes, though he didn't pull away from the question the way Maria half expected him to. She died when I was 17. Car accident. It changed everything, honestly. My father was never quite the same afterward, and I had to grow up faster than I probably should have. I'm sorry, Maria said softly. That must have been incredibly hard. It was, Dante admitted, his voice quieter than usual. But it also taught me things I needed to know, about protecting the people you love, about never taking a single ordinary evening for granted. I think that's part of why I've been so careful with my father since his memory started slipping. I already lost one parent without warning. I refused to lose the other one the same way. Maria reached across the table without thinking and placed her hand gently over his, a small, instinctive gesture of comfort. Dante went still beneath her touch, his eyes flicking down to their hands and then back up to her face, something raw and unguarded flashing across his expression before he carefully composed himself again. You don't have to carry all of that alone, you know, Maria said quietly. Everyone needs someone they can lean on sometimes, even men who run entire families and businesses and whatever else it is you do. I'm not used to leaning on anyone, Dante admitted, his voice rougher than before. It's not exactly encouraged in my world. Weakness gets exploited quickly. I don't think caring about people is a weakness, Maria said firmly. I think it might be the strongest thing about you. Dante didn't answer right away, simply looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite name, something between disbelief and quiet gratitude, as if no one had ever suggested such a thing to him before, or at least, not in a very long time. Slowly, he turned his hand beneath hers, lacing their fingers together for just a moment, before Nora's voice broke the spell, calling out that the lemon cake was ready to go. Maria pulled her hand back gently, her cheeks warm, and stood to fetch the small box from the counter, her heart beating a little faster than it had any business doing over something so simple. Thank you, Dante said, as she handed him the box, his voice carrying a weight that went far beyond the small kindness of a boxed dessert. For tonight, for listening, for not treating me like I'm made of stone. Anytime, Maria said, and she meant it more than she probably should have, given everything Nora had warned her about weeks earlier. But not everyone was pleased by these visits. Two men sitting in a parked sedan across the street had begun watching the diner with far more interest than casual curiosity, noting the timing of Salvatore's visits, the size of his security detail, the moments when his guard seemed to loosen just enough to matter. Inside the sedan, a heavy-set man named Victor lowered a pair of binoculars and turned to the younger man beside him, who was scribbling notes onto a small pad balanced against the steering wheel. How many nights now? Victor asked. 6, maybe 7, over the last 2 weeks, the younger man replied, tapping his pen against the notepad. Old man visits nearly every other evening, sometimes with the son, sometimes just the driver watching from outside, and the son himself has started showing up alone, without the father at all. Stays for an hour, sometimes longer. Victor's mouth curved into a slow, satisfied smile. Dante Moretti, sentimental over a diner waitress. Our employer will be very interested to hear that. You think it's real? The interest, I mean. Not just checking in on an old man who wandered off once. Doesn't matter if it's real, Victor said, lifting the binoculars again to watch as Dante stepped out of the diner, the small white box balanced carefully in one hand, his eyes scanning the street out of habit before he crossed toward his car. What matters is that he keeps coming back, and every time he does, his guard drops a little more. Men like Moretti are dangerous because they trust no one. Give him someone to trust, even a small crack of it, and that crack becomes an opening. And the girl? Victor lowered the binoculars slowly, his expression turning colder, more calculating. The girl becomes useful the moment he decides she matters. Right now, she is nothing to us. But give it time, and she may become the easiest way to reach a man we have never once managed to touch directly. The younger man glanced toward the diner window, where Maria could be seen through the glass, laughing at something Nora had said, while wiping down the counter for closing, completely unaware of the two men parked across the street, completely unaware that her ordinary evenings at Rosie's kitchen had already become a piece on a board far larger and more dangerous than she could have imagined. They did not yet know Maria's name, but they were beginning to understand that she had become important to Dante Moretti, and in their world, anything important to Dante Moretti was also, quite dangerously, a weakness worth exploiting. The van appeared out of nowhere, tires screeching against the pavement as it cut sharply across the street, and stopped directly in front of Rosie's kitchen, blocking the entrance where Salvatore was standing with his cane, waiting for Enzo to bring the car around. Maria was outside taking out the evening trash when she saw it happen, the side door of the van sliding open, two men in dark clothing jumping out and moving quickly toward the old man, who stood frozen in confusion, his cane slipping slightly on the pavement as he stumbled backward. "Hey! Hey!" Maria shouted, dropping the trash bag and running toward them without a single thought for her own safety. "Get away from him!" One of the men grabbed Salvatore's arm roughly, ignoring his startled cry of pain, while the second man turned toward Maria, sizing her up as a minor obstacle rather than a real threat. "Stay out of this," he growled, stepping between her and the van. But Maria didn't stop. She grabbed the nearest thing within reach, a metal trash can lid leaning against the wall, and swung it hard into the man's shoulder, catching him off guard and knocking him sideways, just enough to break his grip on Salvatore's arm. "Run!" Maria shouted at the old man, though she knew even as she said it that he couldn't run, not with his cane, not with his unsteady legs. Salvatore stumbled toward the diner door instead, and Maria positioned herself between him and the two men, adrenaline pounding through her veins, her heart hammering so loudly she could barely hear anything else. The first man recovered quickly, lunging toward her, and Maria barely dodged out of the way, her shoulder slamming painfully into the brick wall of the diner. "Get inside! Call for help!" She shouted toward the window, hoping Nora could hear her through the glass. Inside, Nora had already seen everything unfolding and was screaming into the phone, her hands shaking as she gave the address to whoever was on the other end of the line. But calling for help would take time that Maria and Salvatore didn't have, as the two men closed in again, more determined this time, clearly frustrated by the unexpected resistance from a woman they had dismissed as harmless only moments before. Maria grabbed Salvatore's arm, pulling him toward the diner door, her mind racing, searching for any possible way to buy them a few more seconds. The second man grabbed a fistful of her jacket from behind, yanking her backward hard enough that she lost her footing and crashed to the pavement, pain exploding through her wrist as she instinctively threw her hand out to break the fall. "Maria!" Salvatore cried out, trying to turn back toward her despite his own danger, but the first man seized his arm again, dragging him toward the open van door. Through the haze of pain, Maria forced herself upright, ignoring the sharp throb radiating from her wrist, and threw herself at the man holding Salvatore, wrapping her arms around his midsection and driving him sideways with every bit of strength she had left. The unexpected impact sent both men stumbling, and Salvatore broke free, stumbling backward against the diner wall, gasping for breath. Headlights suddenly flooded the street, a car engine roaring as it screeched to a stop just feet away from the van. The driver's door flew open, and Enzo jumped out, a look of pure fury on his face as he immediately moved to shield Salvatore, positioning his own body between the old man and the two attackers. "Get him inside now," Enzo shouted at Maria, who was still on the ground, cradling her injured wrist against her chest. The two men in dark clothing, realizing the odds had shifted against them and that the sound of distant sirens was growing steadily louder, exchanged a quick glance before scrambling back into their van. The vehicle sped away into the night, tires screeching around the corner and disappearing before anyone could get a clear look at the license plate. For a moment, the street was silent except for the sound of Salvatore's ragged breathing and Maria's own heartbeat pounding painfully in her ears. Then the diner door burst open, and Nora rushed out, phone still pressed to her ear, her face pale with fear. "Maria, oh my goodness, are you hurt? Your wrist, look at your wrist." Maria looked down and realized her wrist was already beginning to swell, an ugly bruise forming along the side where she had landed. But the pain felt distant somehow, secondary to the overwhelming relief that Salvatore was safe, sitting against the wall now, with Enzo crouched protectively beside him, checking him over for any injuries. "I'm fine," Maria said, though her voice trembled slightly as the adrenaline began to fade, leaving her shaking and cold despite the warm evening air. "Is he all right? Salvatore, are you hurt?" "I am fine, thanks to you," Salvatore said, his own voice unsteady, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and gratitude as he looked at her. "You should not have done that. You could have been seriously hurt." "I wasn't going to just stand there," Maria said simply, wincing as she tried to move her injured wrist. Sirens grew louder, and within moments, police cars and an ambulance arrived on the scene, along with, not long after, a dark car that pulled up so fast it nearly jumped the curb. Dante was out of the vehicle before it had fully stopped, his face a mask of barely controlled terror as he scanned the chaotic scene, his eyes finding his father first, safe against the wall, and then Maria, sitting nearby with a paramedic already examining her wrist. "What happened?" Dante's voice was low, dangerous, every word clipped with barely restrained fury as he knelt beside his father, checking him over, with the same desperate urgency Maria remembered from that very first night. "Men tried to take me," Salvatore said quietly. Maria stopped them. She fought them off long enough for Enzo to arrive. Dante's head turned sharply toward Maria, and for a moment, the fury in his eyes gave way to something else entirely, raw and unguarded. Fear and gratitude tangled together so completely that Maria almost didn't recognize the emotion on his usually controlled face. He crossed the distance between them in 3 quick strides, kneeling beside her, his hands hovering uncertainly over her injured wrist, as if afraid to cause her more pain. "Maria, are you all right? Tell me the truth." "It's just my wrist," Maria said, trying for a reassuring smile despite the pain. "I think it might be sprained, not broken. I'll be fine." "You could have been killed," Dante said, his voice cracking slightly on the last word, a level of raw emotion Maria had never heard from him before. "You put yourself between my father and armed men. Do you understand what could have happened to you? I understand that your father needed help, and I wasn't going to just watch," Maria said firmly, ignoring the way her voice shook slightly from the leftover adrenaline. "The same as that first night. Nothing's changed." Dante stared at her, something fierce and overwhelmed passing behind his eyes, and then, without a word, he pulled her carefully into his arms, mindful of her injured wrist, holding her against his chest like he was afraid she might disappear if he let go too soon. Maria froze for half a second in surprise before relaxing into the embrace, feeling the rapid, unsteady beat of his heart against her cheek. "Thank you," Dante whispered against her hair, his voice rough with an emotion he clearly wasn't used to expressing. "Thank you for protecting him." The paramedics gently interrupted, insisting on properly examining Maria's wrist and getting Salvatore checked over for any injuries from the struggle. Dante reluctantly pulled back, though he stayed close beside Maria the entire time, his hand never fully leaving hers, as the paramedic wrapped her wrist in a temporary brace and confirmed it was indeed a sprain rather than a fracture. Police officers moved through the scene, taking statements from Nora and from a few shaken witnesses who had seen the van speed away. Dante spoke quietly with one of the officers, his voice tight with controlled anger, providing details in short, clipped sentences, before turning his attention back to his father and to Maria. "This was them," Dante said grimly, once the officers had stepped away to continue their investigation. "The Kavanaugh family. They've been circling for months, looking for any weakness. I should have seen this coming." "You couldn't have known they would come here," Salvatore said gently, though his own face was pale with the lingering shock of what had almost happened. "I should have had more security posted near the diner," Dante said, his jaw tight with self-directed fury. "I got comfortable. I let my guard down because it felt safe here, because you seemed happy here, and I let that happiness blind me to the risk I was creating for both of you." "You didn't create this risk," Maria said firmly, reaching for his hand despite her injured wrist. "Whoever these people are, they chose to do this. That's on them, not you." Dante looked at her, something raw and vulnerable flickering across his controlled features. "I need you both somewhere safe tonight, somewhere secure, with proper protection. I won't take chances with either of you again." "I have a shift tomorrow," Maria started to protest, though the words felt hollow even as she said them, her mind still replaying the terrifying moment when she had hit the pavement, when she had heard Salvatore cry out her name in fear. "Not tomorrow," Dante said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Not until I know exactly who did this, and exactly how close they came to succeeding. Please, Maria, let me keep you safe. Just for tonight." Something in the raw desperation of his request, so different from his usual controlled confidence, made Maria nod slowly despite her own exhaustion and lingering fear. "All right, just for tonight." Denise helped her to her feet carefully, one arm wrapped protectively around her waist, while Enzo assisted Salvatore toward the waiting car. As they walked away from the diner, away from the chaos of flashing police lights and murmuring bystanders, Maria glanced back once at Rosie's kitchen, at the ordinary little diner that had somehow become the center of a danger she never could have imagined, only a few weeks earlier. She didn't regret a single moment of it, not the trash can lid swung in desperation, not the pain radiating through her wrist, not even the fear that still hadn't fully left her chest. She had kept Salvatore safe, and that was enough to outweigh every risk she had taken to do it. The house Dante brought them to sat behind a tall gate, black iron topped with gold, exactly the kind of gate Salvatore had described on that very first night, back when his memory had been too clouded to lead him home. The driveway curved between rows of tall trees, and the house itself rose up ahead of them, grand but not cold, warm light glowing from nearly every window, as if the staff inside had been expecting their arrival. Guards stood posted at the gate and along the perimeter, more than Maria had noticed on any of her previous visits, their presence a quiet reminder of exactly how seriously Dante was taking tonight's threat. He helped her out of the car, his hand steady beneath her uninjured arm, and guided her inside, while Enzo assisted Salvatore behind them. Inside, a woman in a simple uniform hurried forward, her face etched with concern. "Mr. Moretti, I heard what happened. Is everyone all right?" "Get the doctor," Dante said. "Now, and prepare the guest room down the hall for Maria." "Right away, sir." Maria opened her mouth to protest that she didn't need an entire guest room prepared for her, that the paramedics had already checked her wrist and confirmed it was only sprained, but the exhausted, worried look on Dante's face stopped the words in her throat. This clearly wasn't just about her wrist. This was about a man who had nearly lost his father twice now, needing to feel like he had done everything possible to keep the people he cared about safe. A doctor arrived within 20 minutes, re-examining Maria's wrist with careful, practiced hands, confirming the paramedic's assessment, and fitting her with a proper brace, along with instructions to keep it elevated and iced for the next several days. Salvatore, thankfully, had escaped the confrontation with nothing worse than a few bruises along his arm where the attacker had grabbed him, though the doctor insisted on monitoring him closely regardless, given his age and the shock of the experience. Once the doctor had gone, and Salvatore had been settled comfortably into his own room, with Enzo posted quietly outside the door, Dante found Maria sitting on the edge of the guest bed, staring down at the brace on her wrist, the adrenaline finally fully drained from her system and leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion. "May I come in?" Dante asked from the doorway, his usual commanding presence softened into something more hesitant. "Of course," Maria said, managing a tired smile. He crossed the room and sat carefully beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. Close enough that Maria could feel the tension still radiating off him in waves. "I keep replaying it," he admitted quietly. "The moment I got the call, the drive over, not knowing if I would arrive to find either of you seriously hurt, or worse. I have felt fear before, Maria. In my line of work, I have felt it more times than I could count, but nothing like tonight." "We're both safe," Maria said gently, reaching over to take his hand despite the ache in her wrist. "That's what matters." "You shouldn't have had to fight for that safety," Dante said, his voice tight with frustration, directed entirely at himself. "That was my responsibility, not yours. You are not part of this world, Maria. You should never have been put in a position where you had to swing a trash can lid at armed men to protect my father." "But I did," Maria said simply. "And I'd do it again, without hesitation, if it meant keeping him safe. That's not something you need to apologize for. That was my choice." Dante turned to look at her fully, something raw and searching in his gaze, like he was trying to understand a person whose choices made no sense within the careful, calculated world he had lived in for so long. "Why? Why would you choose to risk everything for a man you barely know, for a family that has brought nothing but danger into your life since the moment you found my father on that street corner?" Maria considered the question seriously, wanting to give him an honest answer rather than something simple or dismissive. "Because kindness shouldn't come with conditions," she said finally. "I didn't help your father that first night, because I calculated the risk and decided it was worth it. I helped him because he needed help, and that was reason enough. And now, after everything, after getting to know him, getting to know you, it's not just about doing the right thing anymore. I care about you both, genuinely. That's not something I can just switch off because things got dangerous." Something shifted in Dante's expression, the careful control he wore like armor slipping further than Maria had ever seen it slip before. "I have spent my entire adult life building walls around myself, around everyone I love, because trusting the wrong person in my world can get people killed. I did not expect to meet someone who would make me want to lower those walls, especially not someone who works evening shifts at a diner and refuses to accept a single dollar for saving my father's life." "Maybe that's exactly why it works," Maria said softly. "I'm not asking you to be anything other than exactly who you are. I'm not scared of your world. Not really. I'm scared of losing people I care about, same as you. But I'm not going anywhere, Dante. Not because of tonight. Not because of whatever comes next." Dante lifted his free hand, gently brushing a strand of hair away from her face, his touch careful and deliberate despite the intensity burning behind his eyes. "I don't deserve someone like you in my life," he said quietly. "Not with everything I carry, everything that follows me." "Let me decide what I deserve to have in my life," Maria said, leaning slightly into his touch. "That's not your decision to make for me." For a long moment, neither of them spoke, the quiet tension between them heavy with everything unsaid, everything that had been building since that very first frightened phone call weeks earlier. Then Dante leaned forward slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away if she wanted to, and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead instead, lingering there for a long moment, as if memorizing the feeling. "Rest," he said softly, pulling back at last. "You've earned it tonight, more than anyone I have ever known. I'll be right down the hall if you need anything at all." Maria nodded, suddenly aware of just how exhausted she truly was, the events of the evening finally catching up to her all at once. "Thank you, Dante, for bringing us here, for taking care of us." "Always," he said, the single word carrying far more weight than its simple meaning suggested. He stood, pausing at the doorway to look back at her one final time, before finally stepping out and pulling the door quietly shut behind him. Alone in the unfamiliar room, Maria lay back against the pillows, her injured wrist throbbing dully, her mind still racing with everything that had happened. But beneath the exhaustion and the lingering fear, something warm and steady had settled into her chest, a certainty she couldn't quite explain, that whatever came next, Whatever danger still lingered out there in the darkness beyond that tall iron gate, she wasn't facing it alone anymore. But as the car had pulled away from the diner earlier that night, and even now, lying safely within the walls of the Moretti estate, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that tonight's attack was only the beginning, and that the Kavanaugh family, having failed once, would not simply give up and walk away. Gunfire cracked through the quiet morning air, and Maria dropped to the kitchen floor instinctively, her heart slamming against her ribs as shouts erupted throughout the estate grounds outside. She had woken early, unable to sleep despite the comfortable guest bed, and had wandered down to the kitchen for a glass of water when the first shot rang out. Now she pressed herself against the cold tile, her injured wrist throbbing as she braced herself against the counter, straining to hear anything over the pounding of her own pulse. Footsteps thundered down the hallway, and Dante burst into the kitchen, his expression fierce and alert, a handgun held steady in his grip as his eyes swept the room before landing on Maria crouched behind the counter. "Stay down," he said sharply, moving toward her in a low crouch. "The Kavanaughs. They found a way past the outer gate. Enzo and the others are handling it, but I need you somewhere secure." "Salvatore," Maria breathed, fear spiking through her chest. "Where's Salvatore?" "Being moved to the safe room now," Dante said, grabbing her uninjured hand and pulling her up carefully, keeping his body angled protectively between her and the kitchen windows. "Come on, we need to move." They stayed low, hurrying through the hallway as more shouts and the occasional crack of gunfire echoed from somewhere near the front of the property. Maria's mind raced, images of the van outside the diner flashing through her thoughts, the desperate fear of that night returning tenfold now that the danger had followed them all the way inside these supposedly secure walls. They reached a heavy steel door hidden behind a bookshelf in Dante's study, and he punched a code into the keypad beside it with practiced speed. The door slid open, revealing a small reinforced room where Salvatore already sat, pale but composed, with a guard positioned protectively at the entrance. "Dante, thank goodness," Salvatore said, relief washing over his features as his son guided Maria inside and secured the door behind them. "What's happening?" "They breached the outer perimeter," Dante said grimly, his eyes still scanning the room out of old habit, even though they were now safely enclosed behind reinforced walls. "I don't know how yet. Enzo is coordinating our people to push them back, but I'm not taking any chances with either of you." Maria's legs finally gave out from the lingering shock, and she sank onto the small bench built into the wall of the safe room, her breathing still ragged, her wrist throbbing painfully from the sudden movement. Salvatore reached over immediately, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. "You're all right," he said gently, though his own voice carried a tremor of fear. "We're safe in here. This room was built to withstand far worse than gunfire." Dante paced near the door, his handgun still gripped tightly, his phone pressed to his ear as he received updates in short, clipped sentences from whoever was on the other end. Maria watched him, watched the barely restrained fury and fear warring behind his controlled expression, and felt a fresh wave of guilt settle over her chest. "This is because of me," she said quietly, "isn't it? They're doing this because of what happened at the diner, because they know I matter to you now." Dante lowered the phone for a moment, turning to look at her with an intensity that stole the breath from her lungs. "This is not your fault, Maria. This is the Kavanaugh family, trying to seize territory and weaken my position, using any leverage they think they can find. You are not the reason for this war. You are simply someone I refuse to let them use against me." "They think I'm a weakness," Maria said slowly, understanding dawning even through her fear. "You are not a weakness," Dante said fiercely, crossing the small room to kneel in front of her, taking her uninjured hand in both of his. "You are the strongest person I have ever known, but that does not mean I will allow anyone to use you as a tool against me. Not while I have breath in my body." The sound of muffled shouting continued outside, occasionally punctuated by gunfire, and Maria could feel every second stretching unbearably long as they waited, trapped between fear for their own safety and fear for the people fighting outside on their behalf. Salvatore reached over and took Maria's other hand, the three of them sitting in tense, silent solidarity as the battle raged beyond the reinforced walls. Nearly 40 minutes passed before Dante's phone buzzed again, and this time, as he listened, some of the tension visibly drained from his shoulders. "They've retreated," he said, lowering the phone slowly. "Enzo says we pushed them back past the outer gate. 2 of their men were captured. No one on our side was seriously hurt." Relief flooded through Maria so intensely that tears sprang unbidden to her eyes, and Salvatore let out a long, shaky breath beside her, squeezing her hand gratefully. "It's over," Salvatore said softly. "For now, at least." Dante knelt again in front of Maria, brushing away the tears on her cheek with gentle fingers, his own eyes suspiciously bright with emotion he rarely allowed himself to show. "I am so sorry you were pulled into this, into any of this. You deserved an ordinary life, Maria, not gunfire outside your window and safe rooms hidden behind bookshelves." "I don't want an ordinary life if it means not knowing you," Maria said, her voice thick with emotion, but steady with conviction. "I chose this, Dante. Every step of it, starting with that first night on the sidewalk. I'm not sorry, and I'm not going anywhere." Dante stared at her for a long moment, something fierce and overwhelmed and utterly undone passing across his features, and then he leaned forward and kissed her, slow and certain, his hand cradling the back of her head with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the danger that had surrounded them only minutes before. Maria kissed him back without hesitation, months of unspoken feeling finally finding release in that single, quiet moment of safety. When they finally broke apart, Salvatore was watching them with a wide, delighted smile, wiping at his own eyes with the sleeve of his shirt. "Well," he said, his voice thick with happiness despite everything they had just endured. "It's about time." Maria laughed, a watery, exhausted sound, and Dante shook his head fondly at his father, though he didn't let go of Maria's hand. "Subtle as ever, Dad. I'm an old man who nearly lost both people he loves most in one morning," Salvatore said, unbothered by the teasing. "I am allowed a little joy amid the chaos." Later that night, once Salvatore had finally gone to bed, exhausted from the events of the day, Dante found Maria still awake, sitting quietly in the study with a cup of tea cradled in her hands, staring out at the dark gardens beyond the window. "You should be resting," Dante said softly, stepping into the room and closing the door gently behind him. "I can't stop thinking about it," Maria admitted, not turning from the window. "The gunfire, the fear on your face when you burst into that kitchen. I keep replaying it, over and over." Dante crossed the room and sat down beside her, close enough that his warmth was reassuring against the lingering chill of fear still clinging to her chest. "That fear does not simply disappear," he said quietly. "I still carry it myself, from every threat, every close call I have survived over the years. It fades with time, but it never fully leaves you." "How do you live like this?" Maria asked, finally turning to look at him, searching his face for an answer, constantly waiting for the next attack, the next threat. "Doesn't it exhaust you?" "It does," Dante admitted honestly. "More than I usually allow myself to acknowledge, but I have also learned that the moments of peace, however brief, matter more because of the danger surrounding them. Sitting here with you right now, safe, breathing, alive, this matters more to me than almost anything else in my life." Maria set down her tea and reached for his hand, lacing their fingers together. "I meant what I said earlier. I'm not going anywhere, Dante. Even after today, especially after today." "I believe you," Dante said softly, bringing her hand to his lips and pressing a gentle kiss against her knuckles. "And that terrifies me almost as much as it comforts me, because now I have even more to lose than before." "Then we protect what matters," Maria said simply. "Together, you don't have to carry all of this alone anymore." Dante studied her for a long moment, something settling and certain behind his eyes, and then he nodded slowly, pulling her gently into his side, and they sat together in comfortable silence, watching the moonlight settle over the quiet gardens, both of them finally allowing themselves a small measure of peace after the chaos of the day. Over the following days, life at the estate slowly returned to a cautious calm. Dante's people worked to secure the perimeter more thoroughly, and word came through various channels that the Kavanaugh family, having lost several men and failed twice now to achieve their goals, was finally willing to negotiate a lasting peace, one that Dante intended to secure firmly enough that neither his father nor Maria would ever face this kind of danger again. Maria stayed at the estate throughout that tense week, her wrist slowly healing, her fear gradually giving way to something steadier and more hopeful. She spent her mornings in the kitchen with Salvatore, teaching him simple recipes from her grandmother's old cookbook, and her evenings with Dante, slowly watching him lower the walls he had built around himself for so many years, piece by careful piece. News of the negotiations reached them gradually, filtered through Enzo's quiet updates and the occasional tense phone call Dante took behind closed doors. The Kavanaugh family, having underestimated both Dante's resolve and the depth of loyalty he commanded from the people around him, found themselves with far fewer options than they had expected when they first set their plan in motion. Two of their captured men, faced with the consequences of their failed attack, proved surprisingly willing to cooperate, offering information that strengthened Dante's position considerably at the negotiating table. "They want peace," Dante told Maria one evening, dropping into the chair across from her at the kitchen table, exhaustion evident in the set of his shoulders. "A real peace, not just a temporary truce until they think they can try again. Territory lines redrawn, guarantees on both sides, the kind of agreement that actually holds." "Do you trust it?" Maria asked, pouring him a cup of coffee from the pot she had just brewed. "I trust that they've lost too much to risk another attempt anytime soon," Dante said, wrapping his hands gratefully around the warm cup. "Trust is a strong word in my world, but I believe this peace will hold, at least for a good while. Long enough for my father to enjoy his days without armed men breaking through our gates." "That's good," Maria said softly, relief evident in her voice. "That's really good, Dante." "It is," Dante agreed, reaching across the table to take her hand. "And it means I finally have the freedom to think about something other than survival for the first time in years." Salvatore shuffled into the kitchen just then, still in his robe, drawn by the smell of fresh coffee, and settled into the chair beside Maria with a contented sigh. "Are you two discussing the peace agreement without me? I demand to be included in matters of family business, especially when they involve my future granddaughter-in-law." Maria nearly choked on her coffee, her cheeks flushing bright red, while Dante shot his father an exasperated look that held no real heat behind it. "Dad?" "What?" "I am simply speaking my mind," Salvatore said innocently, though the mischievous glint in his eyes gave away his teasing entirely. An old man is allowed his hopes. Despite her embarrassment, Maria found herself laughing, the warm, easy sound filling the kitchen and chasing away the last lingering shadows of fear from the week before. "I've been thinking," Dante said one evening, as they sat together on the terrace overlooking the estate's quiet gardens, the danger of the past week finally beginning to feel like a distant memory, rather than an open wound. "About your bakery, the one you've always dreamed of opening." Maria looked at him curiously. "What about it?" "I want to help you make it real," Dante said. "Not as payment, not as some debt I'm trying to settle, simply because I want to see you happy, doing something you love, something that's entirely your own." Maria's eyes widened, emotion tightening her throat. "Dante, that's an enormous thing to offer. I have more resources than I know what to do with," Dante said simply. "And for the first time in longer than I can remember, I finally have something worth spending them on, beyond simply staying alive and protecting the people I love. Let me do this for you, Maria. Please." Tears welled in Maria's eyes again, though this time, they were tears of overwhelming happiness rather than fear. "Yes," she said softly. "Yes, I would love that." Salvatore, watching from a nearby chair with a contented smile, raised his teacup slightly, in a small, silent toast. "To new beginnings," he said warmly, "and to the kind, stubborn young woman who walked into our lives on an ordinary evening and changed everything for the better." Dante pulled Maria close against his side, pressing a soft kiss to her temple as the sun began to set over the gardens, painting the sky in warm shades of orange and gold. The danger they had faced together had tested them in ways neither of them could have predicted, but it had also revealed something neither of them had expected to find: a partnership built not on obligation or fear, but on genuine, unshakable trust. 6 months later, a small bakery opened on a quiet corner not far from Rosie's kitchen, its windows glowing warmly each morning as the scent of fresh bread and pastries drifted out onto the sidewalk. Salvatore visited nearly every day, claiming a favorite table near the window, where he could watch the street outside, greeting customers with the same warm, easy charm that had first drawn Maria to help him on that frightened, confused evening so many months before. And most evenings, once the bakery closed and the last customers had wandered home, Dante would arrive quietly, no longer surrounded by the same tense caution that had once defined every moment of his life, though he never fully lost his watchful habits. He would sit at the counter, watching Maria clean up for the night, marveling at how completely his life had changed since the evening a curvy, kind-hearted stranger had knelt down beside his lost and frightened father on a busy street corner, refusing to walk past the way everyone else had. Nora had eventually left Rosie's kitchen to join Maria at the bakery, unable to resist the offer of steady hours and the chance to work alongside her closest friend, and the two of them fell into an easy rhythm together, much as they always had, filling the little shop with warmth and laughter every single morning. Enzo, too, had become a familiar fixture, stopping by most afternoons for a cup of coffee and a slice of whatever pastry Maria had decided to experiment with that week, always ready with an opinion, usually a favorable one. On quiet evenings, Dante would help Maria close up, sweeping the floor while she counted the register, the two of them talking easily about nothing in particular, the comfortable silence between them, a testament to how far they had both come since that first tense conversation across a diner booth. He had proposed on a warm spring evening exactly 1 year after the night she found his father wandering, lost and afraid, on that same street corner, and Maria had said yes before he even finished asking, laughing through happy tears, as Salvatore, watching from a nearby table, clapped his hands together with unrestrained delight. It had started with a single act of kindness, offered without any expectation of return, and in the end, that simple kindness had become the foundation of a life neither of them could have imagined, built not on power or fear or obligation, but on trust, on genuine care, and on the quiet, unshakable belief that some connections, once formed, are worth protecting, no matter the cost. Maria never regretted stopping for a stranger that evening, not for a single moment, because sometimes the smallest acts of kindness lead to the greatest, most unexpected gifts of all, and love, real love, often begins in the most ordinary, unplanned moments, waiting patiently for someone brave enough to simply stop and offer help.